Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirk Cousins, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we're going to be covering all topics related to the tight end and quarterback positions, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses thus far this season, on average, have been giving up the most points to opposing tight ends in a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard league or a full PPR league. And of course, talking about matchups in regards to quarterbacks in a 4-point per passing touchdown format, but of course, specifically isolating passing statistics alone. So after we go ahead and cover those topics, then we'll transition into talking about our top 16 rankings at both positions. Of course, as you can see to the right of me, we have Travis Kelce, of course, already as our number one. But then we'll progress and show each of them individually. I'll give you guys my opinions and the statistics that justify the reasons as to how I have them ranked and how I believe the positions are going to stack up when it's all said and done at the conclusion of Week 11. Before we begin, I want to remind you guys, after tonight's Thursday night football game between the Green Bay Packers and Tennessee Titans, I will be live streaming here on the channel. So for those of you who have questions going into Week 11 regards to potential trade options that you can make, perhaps starter sit questions, anything of that nature, you can go ahead, join us probably 8:15 to 10:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time later tonight after the game. So go ahead and check that out. Swing on by. Also, if you guys have not yet already and you want continuous daily content from my direction to yours regarding 2022 fantasy football, be sure to subscribe today. Again, besides the live streams that we're going to do on Saturday, Sunday, of course, we're going to have daily content coming in your direction in order to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So do yourself a favor and be sure to click that subscribe button down below. Thank you very much. Also, speaking of the Thursday night football game, for those of you who are trying to get in more daily fantasy, potentially at your fingertips, check out Prize Picks. There's a link down in the description of the video. You can go ahead and sign up today and use promo code Andrew. When you do so, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So they double your first-time deposit match up to $100. So if you deposit 20, you'll be given 20. You deposit 50, you'll be given 50. You can go ahead, pick more or less on a given player statistics in tonight's game between the Green Bay Packers and Tennessee Titans. Put together an entry and, of course, find some success your way. Check that out. Link down in the description. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get into talking about our Week 11 tight end rankings, beginning with matchups. Of course, we want to give you a little bit of perspective as to which of these defenses are giving up the most points thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, we can see that the Arizona Cardinals, Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks, Miami Dolphins, they're the best matchups at the position, but unfortunately, two of those teams are on bye week. In fact, the entire state of Florida, whether it's Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, or Miami, are all on bye week this week. So the tight end position will not have the privilege of such incredible matchups. That all being said, there are still many opportunities for other tight ends, specifically guys like George Kittle going up against the Arizona Cardinals. He has found a lot of success throughout his career against his defense, and not only are they just terrible at stopping opposing tight ends, but they're giving up the most overall yardage, which is a huge thing because when we're talking about the tight end position, of course, touchdowns are relevant, but they're very unpredictable at times. So we want to make sure that the base floor production of our specific tight end has a high yardage count and or reception count that can go ahead and give us a decent performance whether or not we have a touchdown accompanying it. Either way, obviously on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Los Angeles Rams and the New Orleans Saints, two teams that have certainly made it a struggle for opposing tight ends to find success against them. Of course, the New Orleans Saints, most recently, they've given up their fair share of tight end touchdowns. That is great to see as it's progressing in the right direction for recent tight ends. That being said, it's still extremely difficult to rack up yardage and have a consistent performance against that New Orleans Saints defense, which of course, it will be Tyler Higbee with Matthew Stafford at quarterback. We'll of course talk about that in just a moment. Just wanted to give you some perspective on the matter in terms of tight end statistics allowed over the course of the first 10 weeks of the season. Let's go ahead. Let's transition back to our top 16 rankings at the position, beginning with number 1, Travis Kelce. Of course, he should be number 1. He's currently leading the tight end position in all major statistics: targets, receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Need I say more? He's the number 1 and an automatic this week, coming off of a 17-point performance. Another great one coming his way this week. Moving on. Talking about Mark Andrews, they're number 2. Mark Andrews is coming off the bye week, and even prior to the bye week, he had sat against the New Orleans Saints, so hopefully he's fully healthy. We have seen that he has participated in practice on Wednesday and is probably going to once again do that today. If we get a full practice from Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from the direction of Mark Andrews, it's going to give us even more confidence in firing him up this week, taking on the Carolina Panthers. When I've gone ahead and looked at Mark Andrews' overall score lines this season, he has 4 boom performances and 4 bust performances. 4 of those games of less than 10 fantasy points, and 4 of those games of 18.5 or more fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. We're hoping for the upside boom performance this week. Moving on to George Kittle, our number 3, takes on the Arizona Cardinals. Like I was mentioning before, they give up 15.73 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends in a half PPR scoring format. That is an extremely high number. And of course, we want to take advantage of that. We're firing up George Kittle. I know many of you were disappointed with his performance last week of only 1 catch on 2 targets for 21 yards and only 2.6 total fantasy points, but it happens. The volatility of the tight end position, and especially when we take into account how many cooks are in that kitchen. When you have McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, there are so many potential threats to catch touchdowns, to be receiving options within that offense. There's even guys like Jennings and Ray McCloud that obviously get themselves a couple sprinkles of opportunities here and there. But either way, George Kittle should be a fantastic play this week. Last year when he took on the Arizona Cardinals in the 1 games that he was active up against them, 6 catches, 101 yards, and a receiving touchdown for 17.1 fantasy points. We're hoping for the same. Moving on to Dalton Schultz, our number 4. Dalton Schultz continues to be the number 2 receiving option, or potentially, he's the 1A, 1B with CeeDee Lamb, but he is one of the primary options within this Dallas Cowboys receiving offense. I mean, he's coming off another great performance, 8 targets, 6 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Major, especially considering the fact that if you go ahead and take into account the 4 performances in which Dalton Schultz has participated with a starting Dak Prescott this season, he's averaging 6.7 targets with Dak, along with 5.5 receptions, 55 receiving yards, 0.25 receiving touchdowns, and 9.75 fantasy points per game. Again, with only 1 touchdown in those last 4 games, still being able to nearly average 10 fantasy points per game is incredible. Going up against the Minnesota Vikings should not be a difficult matchup. Dalton Schultz should be another one of these great plays. Moving on, number 5, we have Kmet. Over the course of the last 3 games, he has scored 5 receiving touchdowns. That is an extremely high number of touchdowns, but the momentum is building for this offense. As Justin Fields over the last 3 games has thrown for 7 passing touchdowns while doing all the damage on the ground, he's obviously continued to look in the direction of Kmet while they've gotten down to the red zone. And if it's not Kmet that he's looking in the direction of, it's of course an occasional, 3rd string wide receiver here or there, or Justin Fields is just, lowering his shoulder and getting into the end zone with his legs. Either way, as long as Kmet continues to be his primary option. Of course, coming off of another week of 7 targets, 4 catches, 42 yards, had himself 2 receiving touchdowns. That's back-to-back weeks with multiple touchdowns. Kmet is a must-start at this current position, especially considering the fact that they're taking on the Atlanta Falcons going into this game. Moving on to our number 6, we have TJ Hockenson. TJ Hockenson has had 19 targets in the last 2 games with the Minnesota Vikings. That is an unbelievable start to a career with an organization. And yes, he hasn't been able to find the end zone, but his overall opportunity share and the fact that he's being able to pretty much deliver on majority of the opportunities, 19 targets that have led to a total of 16 receptions. We're going to take that number every single week. Now, the yardage is going to be there. If you can find an ever-elusive touchdown within this given week against the Dallas Cowboys, it's going to be a perfect play. Moving on to Pat Freiermuth, our number 7. Pat Freiermuth has had himself a pretty good history of success against the Cincinnati Bengals. And when we go back to week 1, in which he had 10 targets, 5 catches, 75 receiving yards, it does give us hopes that he could potentially produce something very similar. That being said, there is a little bit of inconsistency with him and Kenny Pickett. There are going to be games in which he's a, absolute monster play. In other games where he's just going to be average, he's going to put up 6 or 7 fantasy points, just like last week, 5.6 total fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, 4 catches, 36 yards. Obviously, we want that depth of target and or the target opportunities to increase. But either way, as of right now, still a fantastic option considering the matchup. Moving on to Hayden Hurst. Speaking of the matchup, this is going to be a pretty easy one for Hayden Hurst. Assuming, of course, we're going to be in a situation where this team isn't going to give every single opportunity to Joe Mixon, and he's not going to be the only one scoring touchdowns and moving the ball down the field, Hayden Hurst should see himself a lot of opportunity, mainly because the Pittsburgh Steelers haven't been able to stop the opposing tight end position over the course of the last couple of weeks here. Of course, we saw this last week, the New Orleans Saints tight ends, specifically Juwan Johnson and Adam Trotman, combined for 7 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Philadelphia from Dallas Goedert had 6 catches for 64 a couple weeks ago. Cleveland with David Njoku, 9 catches, 89 and a touchdown. And even Cincinnati week 1. The combination of Hayden Hurst and the other tight ends in this offense, 6 catches for 48 as a combined total. Now that we've established Hayden Hurst as the primary number 1 and the only tight end that is getting himself utilization within this offense with no Jamar Chase in the offense, should be a great option for him this week. Moving on to Greg Dulcich. As the rookie tight end, obviously had a unfortunate performance last week. After the first 3 weeks of his career were fantastic, putting up 8 or more fantasy points in all 3 of those contests, we saw a little bit of a slowdown here. Now, he has an opportunity to get back on track, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders, mainly because Jerry Jeudy is dealing with an injury and may not play this week, and the fact that the Las Vegas Raiders quite literally cannot stop anyone. Again, whether it's on the ground through the air, they have struggled mightily as a defense this season. Now, most recently, we have seen, of course, Granson this last week for the Indianapolis Colts have himself 4 catches for 57 yards, was tackled down at the 1-yard line, could have very easily fell into the end zone. We've also seen multiple other performances, such as the incredible 4 receiving touchdown game from Travis Kelce that put up a huge number on the Las Vegas Raiders defense. I think Greg Dulcich has to be a pivotal part of this offense outside of Courtland Sutton. Who else is going to be catching the ball if Jerry Jeudy's out? Moving on, let's talk about our number 10. We have Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is such a tricky option to go ahead and predict. Yes, he's getting targets, but a lot of those targets are 15 yards over his head or 3 yards into the ground before it even gets to him. These are difficult metrics to potentially try to predict what kind of accuracy we're going to see from a Marcus Mariota and whether those opportunities are going to be down in the red zone, because that is the simple fact. If Kyle Pitts can get opportunities down in the red zone and score himself a touchdown, he's going to be a relevant tight end. But if he's not able to do so, it is going to be extremely difficult, especially considering the matchup against Chicago, for us to trust him on a weekly basis. So as of this current moment in time, I leave him at 10, middle of the pack. It's just purely up to whether Marcus Mariota is up for the task at hand. Moving on to Foster Moreau. Again, with Darren Waller out, Foster Moreau is going to pretty much fill in and find himself a lot of success. I mean, we go back a couple weeks when Darren Waller was out. Foster Moreau came in, 9 targets, 6 catches, had himself a pretty good game. But over the last couple weeks here, he's beginning to get himself more and more utilization, specifically in the red zone. Of course, last week scored himself his first touchdown of the season and even had himself a second opportunity of scoring a touchdown. Unfortunately, was not able to bring that in for the game winner. Of course, the Denver Broncos as a defense as a whole, they've been pretty good in terms of stopping opposing wide receivers, but their biggest issue has been able to stop the run in certain circumstances and, of course, stop opposing tight ends. Most recently, we have seen tight ends from Tennessee, 6 catches for 82 total yards against them last week. Evan Ingram, 4 catches for 55 and a touchdown a couple weeks back. And, of course, the Los Angeles Chargers tight ends, 8 catches for 82. There's a lot of potential here for Foster Moreau in this given week as an option that outside of Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs catching the ball probably 6 times a pop or more, Foster Moreau is next up on the list. Moving on to David Njoku. Now, David Njoku mainly sits here because I don't know where exactly this team is going to be playing. There is a lot of conversation as of right now that I have read where there's going to be a lot of snow that is impacting or accumulating up until we get to that Sunday game against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. So if in fact that game is going to be played outdoors, there could be a lot of weather concerns and or conditions that are, at the highest potential. We know David Njoku has been practicing this week, and we know he's an automatic start when he is able to play, especially considering the fact that the Buffalo Bills gave up 7 catches and 45 yards last week to TJ Hockenson, who is a vertical receiving threat at the tight end position, as is David Njoku. There's a lot of promise there. Again, it just depends where this team is playing and how exactly that game is going to transpire. Moving on to Tyler Conklin at number 13. Tyler Conklin has the advantage of taking on Bill Belichick's defense, and typically you won't ever hear that from my mouth, but considering the fact that they have not been great against the opposing tight end position, specifically against Tyler Conklin just a couple weeks ago in week 8, in which Tyler Conklin had 10 targets, 6 catches, 79 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, all while, CJ Uzomah in that same game, 1 target, 1 catch, 27 yards. Overall, incredible performances from tight ends against this defense. I'm all in on it. We're playing Tyler Conklin within this given week. Moving on to Gerald Everett, our number 14. Gerald Everett is currently dealing with a limited groin injury. He hasn't been able to fully practice this week, and there is a lot of conversations in regards to whether or not Mike Williams and Keenan Allen will be able to return this week to give this offense a spark against the division rival in the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, this team still wants to be able to compete within the division and potentially win said division. And in order to do so, they need to win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Going 0-2 against them will certainly not help. So as of right now, I think if we get Keenan Allen, Mike Williams back, Gerald Everett, limited with a groin injury, could be in this conversation as a higher end tight end too within this given offense. Moving on to number 15, we have Dawson Knox. Again, Dawson Knox is definitely touchdown dependent this last week with 4 catches for 57 yards. That's a great overall performance. We will take that every single week. And of course, the games that he scores the touchdown, he'll get himself that top 5 upside. But that's what we want to see. We want to see ample opportunity going in his direction. As long as Josh Allen is throwing the ball consistently and hopefully not to the other team, and the weather isn't going to be a huge impact for this given game, we should see Dawson Knox with a great performance here. Moving on. Our number 16 is Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee is going to be the, de facto number 1 receiving option within this offense. That is my opinion. Without Cooper Kupp there, they are going to have to get the ball out of Matthew Stafford's hands quickly, especially considering this offensive line is dealing with a bunch of injuries and they're going up against the New Orleans Saints. It doesn't bode well for Tyler Higbee. But like we saw earlier this season from weeks 1 through 4, Tyler Higbee was leading the position in terms of total targets. Hopefully we can get back into that conversation. If we don't, I wouldn't be surprised considering the last 3 performances from him have been awful in terms of overall opportunity and production that follows. All right, let's move on to the quarterback position. Talking about how many points defenses have given up to opposing quarterbacks in just isolated passing statistics alone. And the reason why we isolate passing statistics is because the rushing stats of a quarterback against a given defense aren't dictated by the defense. It is mainly on the opportunity and or willingness of that quarterback to run the ball. Just because Jalen Hurts was able to run the ball on a defense doesn't mean that, potentially Tom Brady is more likely to also run against that defense. It's purely a matter of whether or not that quarterback is capable of doing so and is willing to do so to be able to get and unlock that overall value that is completely separate. So when we go ahead and just talk about passing statistics alone, the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average, with 19 touchdowns allowed in the passing game, which, of course, leads the league at this current moment in time. Now, of course, we want to continue to play those matchups this week. Justin Herbert should be able to, have himself a pretty good game here. We'll talk about him in just a moment. The Tennessee Titans, of course, taking on Aaron Rodgers. We have the Las Vegas Raiders, of course, taking on Russell Wilson. I don't really trust Russell Wilson to too many capacities, but obviously could be a great play there. The Pittsburgh Steelers, even though they have a lot of interceptions, specifically for those coming up against Joe Burrow in week 1, Joe Burrow will have his opportunity to redeem himself this week and hopefully get everything back on track. Either way, we'll talk about this in more of an expansive role as we progress. Just wanted to show you guys these statistics before we get into our top 16 quarterback rankings. Beginning with our number 1, the thumbnail for today's video, it is Justin Fields. What Justin Fields has done over the course of the last 2 weeks is unbelievable. It is legendary. It has broken records. His 555 rushing yards in his last 5 games is the most by an NFL quarterback in a 5-game span in the history of the league. The numbers that he's putting forth, the rushing yards that this offense has put forth in the last 5 games is breaking records in terms of consecutive 200-yard rushing games within an offense. We hadn't seen numbers like that since the 1980s. Unbelievable statistics that are continuing to pile up. Just to put this in perspective, in the last 2 games, Justin Fields has 290 passing yards. Okay, decent numbers. But he has 325 rushing yards in the last 2 games. That is the biggest difference maker. 32.5 fantasy points just coming off of yardage on the ground alone. Not to mention the fact that he's been able to score rushing touchdowns in each of the last 4 games. The fact that he takes on the Atlanta Falcons just makes it that much easier for me to start him. He has been a top 5 quarterback in 4 consecutive weeks and the number 1 overall quarterback in back-to-back performances. I'm hoping for another one this week from Justin Fields. Moving on to Patrick Mahomes, taking on a division rival in the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have been pretty good in terms of stopping opposing quarterbacks thus far this season, but it's Patrick Mahomes. It is going to be extremely difficult to do that against him, especially considering over the course of the last 4 games that he has participated against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, he's averaging 2.5 passing touchdowns per game on average. Now, the potential of Mecole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster potentially missing this week continues to rise as the week progresses and they are not participating in said practices. That will leave it with Travis Kelce, of course, our number 1 tight end, Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and of course, Isaiah Pacheco, against the defense that cannot stop the run. This may be a game in which they want to continue to rely upon the running game to establish themselves down the field, get themselves down in the red zone, and look in the direction of those receiving options, which will, of course, set up Patrick Mahomes for a lot of success. Moving on to our number 3, we have Josh Allen. Like I mentioned in regards to David Njoku and Dawson Knox, we don't know what exactly we're going to see on Sunday. We are hearing as of this current moment in time that there is going to be 3 to 6 feet of snow in the coming days accumulated upon that field. And it's going to be a matter of just a cleanup job. Can they get that field prepared by the time we get to 1 p.m. EST Sunday? If they can't, there's been, a couple rumors in regards to the team potentially moving the game to a different location. They may be just trying to look for a local stadium in the National Football League that is indoors that could potentially house, a lot of tickets that need to be sold if they end up moving that. But again, moving an entire game in itself is difficult to do considering all that, logistics. We'll see what happens. Either way, I'm hoping that Josh Allen and the weather isn't going to be a big factor for him because we know how valuable he is in terms of fantasy football. Moving on to Joe Burrow, our number 4. Joe Burrow takes on a team that the last time he faced in week 1, he threw 4 interceptions and lost a singular fumble. 5 total turnovers in that game. That all being said, the Joe Burrow that we've seen over the course of the last 4 games is completely different. This offense is far more improved in comparison to what they were in week 1 of this season. It almost looked like they were having a Super Bowl hangover within that given week or within that given first month of the season. Now that they've found their stride in terms of running the ball and of course being a dominant passing offense, even without Jamar Chase, I expect a huge performance here from Joe Burrow. Moving on to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, in my opinion, gets a little bit of a downgrade, mainly because of Dallas Goedert's absence and his potential, stint here on the injured reserve for the next 4 weeks. Without Dallas Goedert, I don't see anybody outside of Devonta Smith and, of course, A.J. Brown being his primary receivers. He hasn't utilized anybody else at a consistent enough rate for me to have confidence there. And the fact that they have to take on guys like Stephon Gilmore and Isaiah Rodgers as the primary number 1 and 2 cornerbacks of the Indianapolis Colts, all they really have to do, double team both of those total receivers and just let everybody else feast. Let everybody else try to beat you in that game. Now, of course, they're going to have to stop the run. The Indianapolis Colts have done a pretty good job at doing so, but they're not going to be able to stop, Jalen Hurts from scrambling, making plays, and at the end of the week, probably having himself a decent performance, enough to where he is a top 5 option. So here's the thing about Justin Herbert. If, in fact, we do get a full confirmation that Mike Williams, Keenan Allen fully practice today and tomorrow and end up playing this upcoming Sunday, I'm 100% putting Justin Herbert within my top 5 conversation, probably even ahead of Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts. Now, the primary reason I feel so confident about the matter is because in the last 4 games that Justin Herbert is taking on the Kansas City Chiefs defense, he is averaging 3 passing touchdowns per game against that defense. I'm absolutely all in. I'm on board for the Justin Herbert breakout performance, especially considering how quiet he has been in the course of the last 6 weeks here without Keenan Allen and Mike Williams active. Moving on, let's talk about our number 7, Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, again, he's a good quarterback. He'll turn over the ball every now and then, but the matchup in itself, taking on the Minnesota Vikings, it is extremely advantageous. I mean, we have seen Taylor Heineke throw for 2 touchdowns against them. We've seen Teddy Bridgewater throw for 2 touchdowns against them. So, of course, Dak Prescott, that's an automatic. We're hoping, just like last week, for a 3+ touchdown game, 250+ passing yards, and a huge performance against the top 2 team in the NFC. Moving on. Let's talk about our number 8, Lamar Jackson. When he's going up against the Carolina Panthers, and his offense is coming off of a week in which they had a lot of players not playing in week 9, had a bye week in week 10, and now approach week 11 with hopefully Devin Duvernay, Mark Andrews, Gus Edwards fully healthy and ready to go. This should be another great performance from Lamar Jackson where he gets back on track up against the Carolina Panthers. I mean, we most recently saw Marcus Mariota torch this defense twice in the last 3 weeks. Why not Lamar Jackson, who's one of the best in the league? Moving on to Kyler Murray. He did practice earlier today. I was given confirmation of that. If, in fact, we do see Hollywood Brown return, I'm all in on starting Kyler Murray. Imagine having DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Hollywood Brown, and Rondale Moore. Of course, we would have also loved to have seen Zach Ertz within that conversation. Season-ending injury is unfortunate, but those 3 receiving options make it so much easier for you to get your job done. Kyler Murray, please put down the war zone and get ready this upcoming week against San Francisco 49ers. Their defense is no joke, but their secondary could certainly be taken advantage of based on the injuries that they've sustained this season. Moving on to Aaron Rodgers playing tonight. For those of you who have an opportunity, I don't mind playing Aaron Rodgers, specifically because of the matchup against the Tennessee Titans, who are giving up nearly 17 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format to opposing quarterbacks in terms of passing statistics alone. The fact that Aaron Rodgers is coming off of a momentous week in which he put together 224 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, of course, half those yards and all of those touchdowns going in the direction of Christian Watson against a pretty good defense. I think there's a chance, because of the injuries that this defense has had to deal with all season long, and the fact that this offensive line is certainly finding their stride now, there's a great chance that Aaron Rodgers, with the return of Randall Cobb and an offense that potentially has a little bit more confidence going into a short week, could take advantage of the matchup. Moving on to Daniel Jones, our number 11. Daniel Jones, even though the fact that he threw the ball 17 times last week and they ran the ball as an offense 47 times, was still able to manage to put up 18.28 fantasy points. Of course, like we've talked about in the last couple weeks, he's going to be a 1 touchdown per game kind of player. Now, if he's able to potentially get his normal average of 40 rushing yards, that'll pretty much account for another touchdown. But anytime he's able to do more than that, get himself an additional rushing or passing touchdown in that game, that's where his upside lies. Otherwise, we truly do expect him to be a 15-point play, and the upside relies upon anything extra that he presents. Going up against Detroit this week, there's a lot of opportunity for that upside. Moving on to Kirk Cousins, our number 12. Speaking of throwing 2 touchdowns, Kirk Cousins unfortunately was not able to do so last week, even though he has been a machine at throwing 2 touchdowns throughout the course of the last couple years here with the Minnesota Vikings. That all being said, you're taking on the Dallas Cowboys. We just saw Aaron Rodgers take advantage of this defense coming off of a 6 losing streak. I mean, the fact that Anthony Brown could not cover Christian Watson for the majority of the game, it would be hard-pressed for me to imagine a game in which Justin Jefferson cannot have himself a great game. I understand he's probably going to see Trayvon Diggs for the majority of that game, but Justin Jefferson, healthy and ready to go, and that toe injury isn't going to bother him, he should be a fantastic play. And of course, Kirk Cousins should benefit for that. Moving on to Marcus Mariota. Again, Marcus Mariota has been far too consistent in the National Football League as a fantasy quarterback play to ignore. He's within the top 13 for a reason now. 2 out of the last 3 weeks here, he put up great performances, of course, coming off of a game in which he had 17.74 fantasy points. I'm not expecting that high of an upside this upcoming week against the Chicago Bears, but do not forget, like I mentioned earlier this week, the Chicago Bears have given up 31 total points to opposing offenses in each of the last 3 games, whether it has been the Detroit Lions this last week, the week before with the Miami Dolphins, and the week before that, the Dallas Cowboys. All pretty good offenses, but as a whole, I think Marcus Mariota probably continues that streak. Moving on to Jimmy Garoppolo, our number 14. Jimmy Garoppolo has been extremely consistent. He has produced 5 consecutive games of 15 or more fantasy points. Now, of course, when he's taken on the Arizona Cardinals in the past, specifically the last 2 times that he's faced them, 2 touchdowns in the passing game in each of those contests. We're hoping for something very similar to that. Obviously, he was bailed out with that rushing touchdown last week, and hopefully won't have to rely upon stuff like that in the future as long as he's able to get George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and of course Christian McCaffrey involved in the receiving game. Moving on to Jared Goff for number 15. Even though Jared Goff has been an average quarterback since, probably week 5, really hasn't had those extremely high upside performances like we saw early on in the season, he is still a pretty good option going into this given week, taking on the New York Giants defense. Of course, we're expecting Jared Goff to be a 220 passing yard kind of guy with 1 touchdown. If he's able to, attribute that performance with an additional touchdown here or there, of course, his performance gets into that upper range where we'd love to see it going into this week against the Giants defense. Moving on to Matt Ryan, number 16. I understand that many of you would hesitate about playing Matt Ryan. I understand he came off of a great week against a mediocre defense, if not bad defense, in the Las Vegas Raiders. That all being said, the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles made it a conscious effort to go out and potentially sign Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh earlier today and yesterday means that they cannot stop the run, and they desperately need help doing so, not only in this coming week's game, but of course future games with Jordan Davis, of course, their rookie first-round pick defensive tackle from Georgia, out. Matt Ryan, because of the play action, should be able to take advantage of this game and make this far more competitive than people think. That's going to cover it for me today. I appreciate you guys watching. If you guys like today's video, be sure to click the like button down below. Do not forget, rankings are subject to change. Join us Sunday morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll be talking about our updated rankings at all 4 primary positions, top 36 running backs and wide receivers, top 16 quarterbacks and tight ends, up to date for Sunday morning to help you guys set your lineups. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Enjoy tonight's game. Join us after the game, as I'll be live streaming here on the channel, talking all things fantasy. And until then, guys, I'll see you. Peace.